Welcome to Dr. Lotte Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lotte and the host of this podcast. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Laura to you all. So, Laura Danger is a licensed educator, certified fair play facilitator, certified life coach, and creator who has been teaching and facilitating in Chicago for over 12 years. She has advanced endorsements in the areas of English as a second language and learning disabilities. Her mission is to influence social change in a way that empowers individuals to value care, connection, and community. She's an educator, community advocate, and a millennial parent, using her platform to empower overwhelmed caregivers to value their own time and the priceless care labor they provide. She believes we don't have to compromise our values and live mediocre lives. She is impassioned, silly, and sincere, and brings equal doses of ambition and realism to her work. She has been interviewed by HuffPost, In Style, as well as numerous podcasts, and is also a co-host of her own podcast, Time to Lean. So welcome, Laura. It's such an honor to have you as a guest today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to mention right now that you have a huge following on both TikTok and Instagram. You know, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people following her work, and you can find that at That Darn Chat. And we will also put this in there. We'll reiterate this later at the end of this interview. But she does some great work, and I can't wait to have her share some of it with you today. So the first thing I would like you to share with the listeners is, can you tell them a little bit about the fair play method?
Yes. So I'm all of those things that you mentioned. As part of my day job, I help develop curriculum, and I facilitate groups and individual and couple work in the fair play method. So the fair play method, it's a system that was developed by the author Eve Rodsky. It is very research-based. It's basically a communication framework for talking about domestic labor and trying to find more equitable division of domestic labor that doesn't rely on one person delegating. Because I feel like for so long, and I hear this from a lot of people, they'll go to couples counseling or they'll look up online and it's like 10 tips and tricks, how to communicate, make a list, speak more nicely. There's all of this continued reliance on one person being the manager at home. And so fair play is this method. There's a book, there's a deck of cards, and you are addressing the emotional and mental load when you actually communicate about domestic labor. So I don't know how far you want to go into it, but that's the basics.
Right. So that when you communicate the mental load and emotional labor, what does that mean for people? What is that, the mental load and emotional labor, when you're talking about the division of labor in the house?
So when you're talking about doing chores, what happens a lot of times is one person will say, I need your help, or how can I help you out? Just give me a list and I'm happy to be of service. And you might do that with things like the dishes or taking the trash out or getting groceries. And someone will do the actual last part, the following through of the task. And in fair play, we break all tasks down into three parts. There's the conception, the planning, and the execution. So going to the store and picking up the groceries. So that is, I don't know, it could take an hour, it could take 45 minutes. That is the execution piece. That is sometimes the smallest part, the simplest part of the task. And then there's the conception, which is knowing you're out of groceries, knowing that it needs to happen. There's the planning piece. That's the middle. That's what's the food preference? What's our budget? How old is the stuff in the back of the fridge? Dietary restrictions, dietary priorities. all of those pieces, getting the rhythm down in your family, knowing when to go to places, that's what we call the mental load. Now you combine all three parts, then you are fully responsible for, in this case, the groceries. Now that's the mental load, but the other piece that I want to bring in, and I want to give a shout out to Rose Hackman, who wrote the book, Emotional Labor. There is this emotional labor, which is, I need to provide care and concern and thought and safety for my family by providing these things in a caring and in a way that meets our family's needs. And there's the emotional labor of how do I bring other people in while also maintaining a positive home and relationship environment, which is not nothing. There's a lot to that.
Yes, there is absolutely so much planning. And like you said, going to the grocery store, that's the easy part. But it's all that planning, who's going where, who needs a snack on the way, who has extracurricular activities this week, and planning all of that and knowing what to do at each step along the way. And so what do you typically see that this workload typically falls on the women or typically falls on the men?
Well, there's a lot of data. It's been well researched, and like all things in our world, it's been well researched in straight relationships. But the dominant cultural norm is this framework, the specific roles, and oftentimes it does fall on women, especially, like I said, in those cisgendered heterosexual partnerships. It doesn't even matter who's earning more. It doesn't matter who's working outside of the home. Consistently, women are doing 2 to 3 times the amount of domestic labor. And oftentimes that is not quantifying the mental time, and it's not taking into account the weight, the mental and emotional weight, and the toll that takes. One thing that I like to think about or like to bring up is when you are the more reliable one, physically, emotionally, mentally reliable one in the partnership, you lack flexibility. So a lot of times women will end up taking more flexible jobs when they have children. They will turn down opportunities because they have to be, or they feel pressured to be, or for whatever reason, are becoming a primary parent or primary domestic engineer.
And so when they're trying to divide their labor, you talk about something called weaponized incompetence. Can you give an example of what that is?
So I'm sure you've seen a joke or you've seen a video. It's often presented as a joke in our culture. This idea, the example that I like to give is the how to never get asked to do the dishes again. And oftentimes this is a video or a joke or a story or in a sitcom, and a wife will ask for help. Hey, can you help me with the dishes? And her husband will get up and go to the sink and say, where's the dish soap? How do I do this? Or leave, crusty egg and cheese on the plate, or load the dishwasher so silly, so ridiculously that it is annoying that she's got to redo it. And oftentimes in these scenarios, in the viral videos and the sitcoms, the guy will turn around and wink at the camera, knows fully what he is doing. And what ends up happening in those scenarios is somebody's asking for help. The other person is doing such a bad job that it either causes harm or is just so annoying that it is easier for the other person. It is less effort for the other person, whether it's emotionally, physically, mentally, that they're not going to ask again. They're going to do it on their own. So they lose trust.
No, that's a very good point. Or they'll just do sloppy dishes and then the person has to redo it. So
Right.
they can take anything and turn it around. And so it becomes a weaponized incompetence, or they're pretending to be incompetent, and there's no willingness to learn that task and to be of help. That's the bottom line.
Right.
They're trying to get out of it. There's also the nag paradox. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the nag paradox, we all know so well. And it comes down to when one person says, just tell me what to do. And then turns around and says, don't tell me what to do. And it's a lose-lose situation. And I don't want to blame either party in this situation. But the power dynamic and the energy dynamic present in when one person is directing the other, no one wants to feel nagged. No one wants to feel like a nag. And this nag paradox, the idea of nitpicking, you're being too particular, your standards are too high. This is all so common. And at its core, where the term nag comes from, or nitpicking comes from, is the fact that we treat domestic labor as if it is frivolous. You know, you get upset over nothing. You get upset over nothing. But on the flip side, when I tell you to do something, you're getting upset too. If I am upset at you and you are upset at me, we're just going to go in this cycle. Just over and over, everybody is upset over something that we treat as frivolous. If we would instead take it seriously, be explicit and clear, have a full, open conversation about the time and energy and standards and values in there, you do away with that nag paradox.
So for listeners that, let's say they're middle-aged, they're in their 50s now, and they realize that they've been doing everything their whole marriage, what advice do you have to them? Because can they teach that old dog new tricks, or is that almost impossible? What is your take on that?
So there is really interesting research on this. I hate to say it, but when you acknowledge that you might not be satisfied with something, or when an expectation is not meeting, when something is not meeting your expectation, you're unhappier. I mean, it seems really simple, but a lot of times people middle-aged or older will report, there's data that says that they report being more satisfied with the exact same division of labor as younger people, because the expectation was not necessarily there. Whereas younger generations are signing up for, hey, this is a dual career. Like, no one's surviving on one income at this point. We're all going into it expecting dual income. So if we are expected to do the same work outside of the home, we expect it inside of the home. So there is a generational divide happening here. You can absolutely teach an old dog new tricks, 100%. And this is where that interesting research comes in. If you are willing to engage in a conversation, if you are willing to be influenced and have a good faith effort, it doesn't even matter if the division changes. One person can still do 90 and the other person can still do 10. What it is being clear. So when your expectation and understanding aligns with the reality, that's where relationship satisfaction comes from. So if you can look at it and say, hey, I'm still going to do 90%. Why don't you do dishes from the conception to the execution? One thing. And you will hold yourself accountable. I will trust you to do it. I will get out of your hair. I'm never going to bother you because we set a standard. We're going to do it. Just one task. It's like a spark of, oh, wow, I see. I feel seen. I feel heard. This is aligning with my expectations. It can drastically change how you relate to each other.
Yeah, that's just great advice. You talked about the book and the cards in the beginning. Is that something that can help people if they get that?
I would highly recommend it. Again, I didn't write it. I don't make a buck if you buy it. I think it's great. you can start a bunch of different ways. If you're interested, if you're interested in starting with the Fair Play book, you can get it from the library. It's on audio. It's on audio. There is also a Fair Play documentary. So if you're a visual learner, you could sit down and watch the movie, and it talks about the mental load. Eve Rodsky has a podcast also. But the book is very straightforward. It's very clear. I do not recommend getting the cards without the book. That is my number one piece of advice. If you don't have the language to communicate about the tasks, don't start there. Everybody I've talked to, it's been a disaster, myself included.
Oh, that's good advice. So definitely get the book and then get the cards to go along with it. Now, you mentioned before, TV shows and punchlines and things in movies. What are your thoughts on how we've made women's frustrations the punchline of jokes in film and in our society?
This is where I get very impassioned. There is this comedian. I'm not gonna shout her out because she's just one in a million. This has been a long running joke, but she opens her set every night with, "Hey, it's a girls' night out." She speaks to a mostly female crowd. "Hey, it's girls' night out. How many of you have gotten a text from your husbands in the last, since you got here?" And then she will go around and call on people in the crowd to read the ridiculous text messages they've gotten. "Hey, what do I feed the kids for dinner? Hey, do you know where the kid went?" One of them is like, "I lost the kid." Simple questions. What time do they go to bed? Do I need to wash them? All of these things. And they laugh and they laugh and they laugh. The crowd goes wild every time. Whereas what's really going on is those women do not have the autonomy to step away from their families for an hour without their mental energy being drawn in. That pisses me off. That makes me very upset when I leave the house, and if I'm getting texts, "How do I do this? How do I do this?" I'm feeling interrupted. I don't have the same access to relaxation. These people in the crowd shouldn't, I understand why they laugh. I am not here to blame anybody for coping the way they're going to cope. I wish that they felt permission to not treat their frustration lightly. And that's what it does. This culture of there's a skit from Mary Tyler Moore. It's like an old one. Husband walks in and she's upset about something. And he's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, might as well go back to work." And he backs away slowly. And it's always this, "Oh, women are so emotional and hysterical, and they're always so upset about everything and nagging." And it just allows for us to dismiss the reality of, yes, women are more stressed out. I wonder why.
Absolutely. No, that's such a good point. Because it turns around the table. So when those men, there's so many, you can wrap up with narcissism as well. The whole, how many of these men are narcissists and they can't handle and do anything on their own. And, but that is such a good point, because when we see it on social media, when we see it on TV shows, it becomes an acceptance in a different way. We laugh at this, and we just keep stuffing down our emotions, and the life just goes on the way it was. And it doesn't create any change because we're still joking about it. It's still laughable. Like many things about women, like you said, women are nagging, right? That's what you get a lot. Or women are too emotional, they're too needy, and this and that. But the truth is that they're just overworked, and they're not being listened to. So now I've seen your videos online where you talked about how society has convinced women that their needs are too much. So, what would you like to share with the women listening to this episode today?
Oh, so many things. I think maybe I'll take it back to what I said about the emotional labor of maintaining comfort. And that is that the pressure of doing that in a relationship is often placed on women. And the impact of that is if a marriage or a relationship does fall apart, she's blamed for not being able to make it work or change the environment. But that also often demands that she not have boundaries, push past her own boundaries or capacity. And anybody who has ever done work on boundaries, Nedra Glover Tawwab is one of my favorites. Boundaries are about maintaining and creating sustainable relationships. So often we're told being self-sacrificing is a way to love. Honoring your capacity is the way to create real long-term love, where you're showing up authentically and where you're letting people love you. So your needs are not too much. Communicating them, being clear about them is a gift to the people around you.
No, that's excellent advice. Would you say that men are capable of care? Men's contributions are often simple, helping out tasks or saying, well, I provide for the family financially, and that's where it ends. Now, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I have a lot of thoughts on that. um, so Chelsea Conaboy, who wrote Mother Brain recently, wonderful book, compiled all of this data about how our brains change when we become parents. And this isn't necessarily a parenting thing, but it just comes down to the fact that our brains are malleable and wonderful at learning. And so just like anything, domestic work and care work is learned skill. And the more you expose yourself and learn and put in that good faith effort, the better. Now, the benefit, there's lots of data on this. There's benefits of men who take parental leave, long-term benefits to their relationships, to their wives' careers, and to their bonds, longer lasting bonds with their children. But also just rethinking this idea of showing up in a very rigid way. We want to move past the idea that you are only as valuable as you are productive or through work, and instead consider that there is providing emotional safety and physical security. You can provide and show up in all of these ways. Money's replaceable. Money comes and goes, jobs come and go, but you're needed and necessary as a person to be present and emotionally there in your family.
And if we talk about the children, now many children are raised being taught traditional gender roles that are outdated. For example, little girls are being taught to be good cleaners, pick up around the house, learn to cook, and essentially they're learning house management skills. While many little boys might be raised with much lesser degree of household education. Do you think the way we uphold these norms contributes to what we've talked about today?
It's a very interesting one. One of my favorite pieces of data that is just mind-blowing is that in surveys of teenagers between the age of 15 and 17, by then, boys have 1 additional hour a day of leisure time compared to girls. And in that time, girls are doing things like helping around the house, grocery shopping, and community service. So yes, absolutely, that difference continues to carry. And I think that even when boys are helping out around the house when they're growing up, they're still being taught that they're helpers and it's not necessarily their responsibility. So bringing in the principles of fair play and empowering regardless of gender, any child to understand the mental and emotional load, priceless, so priceless.
Now you have children yourself, right?
I do.
What,
I have a 7 and 4-year-old.
and at what age are they different sex or
Girls, 2 girls.
two girls? So at what age would you suggest that people start teaching their kids about the division of labor, and how do they implement that in their house? If they now listen to this and say, wow, I have 2 kids under 10, I do 90% of the work in my house, where do I even start?
So I would say, I wish that we had more options of examples of men as primary caregivers and leading the charge in domestic work on TV and movies and things like that. But I think that this is a really interesting conversation. If you are a household where there is a mom and a dad, to make sure that dad understands what kind of example and those implicit lessons that they pick up. One thing that I think is really helpful, it doesn't matter how old or young your child is, but I call it a think aloud. Basically, as you go, being really explicit about the type of labor you're doing. So just an example, I have a 7 and a 4-year-old, and we had a birthday party coming up. And my husband and I have been pretty out loud about, hey, I'm responding to this email. I am going to take a look at the map and see how long it's going to take to get there. Let's consider things like how old they are, what their family is like when we get a gift. So not just magically, the shampoo fairy where you're like, hey, we're out of shampoo. And then the shampoo shows up. If you are verbalizing and thinking aloud as you do things, your children begin to notice that stuff, including nowadays, so many of us sit on our computers while everybody's on their tablets or whatever, doing research and admin work for your household. And it looks like you're just playing on your computer, but you're scheduling, booking, doing bills. If you can verbalize and talk about those sorts of things and as it goes, it's great. And as your kids get older, instead of giving them a list on a Sunday to clean, you start giving them, you sit down and you lay out ahead of time, here's what it looks like to clean your room. Now you take that responsibility. You are now fully responsible for it, and start to teach them the CPE part, the understanding the whole task and being responsible for it part, even just in small things, they're fully responsible.
And when your kids are teenagers, what do you hope to see, them doing to contribute to the house?
Oh, in my own home, this is a good one. I'm hoping that they will be another functioning member, the same way that my husband and I are fully responsible for different things. We assign certain tasks to ourselves or to each other. We collaborate on that. And then we trade as capacity changes, a big project comes up, or, someone's sick. I'm hoping that my kids will be involved in those conversations and be practicing communication on that with us. That's my biggest hope. And my husband and I talk about this all the time. I just hope they don't feel, my biggest thing is we have such an emphasis on finding a romantic partnership in the nuclear family. And I'm hoping my kids just want to have a good life and have a home and a family that really reflects what they actually want. And I hope they can verbalize that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I hope they, the romantic relationships and all that, once they get to high school, and, people want to be liked, they want to have a partner, they want to have a boyfriend or girlfriend, and, they're teenagers and they're growing up and learning to stand on their own feet. What advice do you have to the parents of teenagers in terms of learning how to select a partner that is going to be the person that shows up for them, and not stepping into a relationship where maybe their daughter will then be doing 98% of the housework, but now she also has a dream of, becoming something and working and having her own life path. What advice do you have, or what advice will you give your kids when they get to that age in terms of learning how to find out about other people and the division of labor?
I would say nobody has to be perfect going into a relationship, but knowing your needs and being able to communicate about your needs and interests and desires, I think that personally is the most important thing. I've been with my husband for a very long time, and we've grown a lot and changed a lot. And I don't think either of us had those communication skills going in. And I do hope that, again, I hope to de-emphasize the need for their loving relationships to look a certain way, and instead to be upfront about, I hope they don't find someone who is not curious. Find someone who's curious and wants to learn and grow. And so they don't have to have the right answer. If you say, what does fair look like in your household? If they say, I don't know, that's great. That's a great answer. I'm not sure. Let's talk about it. So I hope that they can be curious about themselves and also prioritize curiosity over just like settling. Ugh, that word.
And if you could give advice to people that are listening that are realizing now how much of the household chores they're actually the person in charge of most of it, what advice do you have to them?
I would say the number one piece of advice I have is that it's not too much to want to talk about domestic labor. It's not frivolous. It's not silly. It's not, you're not nagging to feel upset about doing more than your fair share of domestic labor. The number one thing, I can't tell you what is right for you. There are a million factors as to why you might divide your things the way you divide them. But explicit communication is key. And yeah, I guess it's okay. It's okay to be upset about this stuff. You have full permission, if you need it from me, to want to make a change, and that's okay.
I love it. And if people, do you teach any classes, or what is the best way can they work with you? Do you have a website?
Yes. So I periodically take coaching clients on. And so if you go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, that's where I keep the information and up to date on if I'm available or not. But I do workshops. I'm working on an on-demand workshop, so you can download it and listen or watch. I have resources that you can download that go along with the Fair Play stuff. And on my podcast with my co-host, Crystal, the Time to Lean podcast, we take questions and we talk about trending topics and documentaries and TikTok videos that go viral. And we talk about the dynamics and how we can apply them to our own lives.
That's great. And I will put that link in the podcast notes as well. So the website is That Darn Chat, which is the same name that you have on Instagram and TikTok. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on the show today. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. It's been super fun.